Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargav, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about why milk prices continue to go down and how it is affecting dairy farmers. We will also talk about the issue of non personal data being allowed to be shared by domestic companies. But first, we talk about the political crisis in Rajasthan. For over 2 weeks now, the political climate in the state has remained precarious. The tussle between Chief Minister Ashok Gehlot and Sachin Pilot, his now former Deputy Chief Minister, has led Pilot to rebel against his own party along with 18 other MLAs. The root cause of this tussle is believed to be the position of the Chief Minister, which Pilot was hoping to occupy prior to the state elections. Pilot and the 18 rebel MLAs have now launched a full-blown rebellion against Ashok Gehlot, and their demand is that they cannot accept his leadership anymore. Now, Gehlot believes that he still has the majority in the state, even without the rebel MLAs. This is why his cabinet has asked the governor of the state, Kalraj Mishra, to hold a session of the Rajasthan Assembly on the 31st of July. But their request has been denied 3 times now. An important thing to note is that even though they are asking for an assembly session, there has been no mention of a floor test anywhere. A floor test is how the Congress party in the state under Gehlot will be able to prove its majority. In this segment, we first talk to Manoj CG, who reports on Congress from the Indian Express, about why the party has not mentioned the floor test and why the BJP and the Sachin camp remain silent on the matter. Manoj, Ashok Gehlot's cabinet believes it has the majority. They have asked for the assembly session to take place thrice now. They have been denied, of course. But they haven't explicitly mentioned that they want the assembly session to happen because they want a floor test. What is the reason for that? Why not mention the floor test?
That's the most interesting aspect of this whole episode now. Because the Gehlot camp, at least the Congress, has openly said to the media, publicly stated that they have a majority and given a chance, they can prove their majority in the assembly. But in their all three proposals they have made to the governor, they have not mentioned the agenda. At least when the governor returned the file for the first time, the second time when they made the proposal again, they mentioned the situation of coronavirus. The assembly perhaps wanted to discuss or make some initiatives, interventions, but there was no mention of this flow test. So we reached out to the Congress. We asked the Congress, why are they not mentioning explicitly, as you pointed out, this flow test as an agenda? So the Congress point of view is that the Council of Ministers, they need not mention the agenda at all. It is not in the governor's jurisdiction to ask the Council of Ministers to propose, to make clear the agenda for an assembly session. So they believe the governor, by seeking to know the agenda, is just delaying convening of a session. And unofficially, the Congress says if the Council of Ministers, if the cabinet states a reason, that may open a door for the governor asking more queries. In case if the Council of Ministers mention a floor test, the governor could then ask for a motion and setting a date like 15 days later. Once the motion is moved, then set a date for 15 days. That kind of conditions which the governor can make. That is an apprehension which the Congress has, and they say the governor doesn't have the discretion or the jurisdiction to make all those suggestions. Why go down that road? The Congress believes the Council of Ministers, when they make a recommendation, the governor is bound to accept that recommendation.
And during this time, we have seen the rebel MLAs being silent on this issue. Moreover, the BJP, the opposition in the state, has been silent on it too. What is the reason for that? Is it because they don't see an opportunity to come to power at this point?
Yeah, we will have to, because there is no convincing explanation from the BJP so far. What we are getting to hear is that the rebels, the 18 or 19 of them, their strength is not enough to bring down the government. So if you go just a back of the hand calculation, the BJP has 72 MLAs. They have the support of a regional party, which has 3 members. So that takes them to 75. Plus this 19, which means the anti-Gehlot camp will be somewhere around 94. Then they're hoping the support of 3 more independents. So it takes them to 97. So it is still not enough to bring down the government or topple the government. So that is perhaps holding the BJP back. Maybe it's playing a waiting game to see if the Sachin camp can get 4 or 5 more MLAs and then get into the act, flow test, move a no confidence motion of that sort. The same reasoning is said to be behind the silence of Mr. Sachin Pilot also and his camp also. Why, while waging a rebellion, they're not seeking a flow test? One, the official explanation for the Sachin camp is that they're still in the Congress. Mr. Sachin Pilot, as well as the MLAs, are still in the Congress. Why should we ask for a flow test? That's what they say. Because our rebellion is against the chief minister and his style of functioning. Why should we ask a flow test? But the unofficial reason said to be again, it's all based on the numbers.
And could you also talk about, the kind of advantage that the Gehlot government hopes to have if a floor test happens right now and they do have the numbers?
Because when a meeting of the Congress Legislature Party was skipped by a Pilot and the MLAs who are with him, twice we saw the Congress approaching the Speaker, seeking initiation of a disqualification proceedings against these 19 MLAs. On the basis of the complaint by Chief Whip Mr. Mahesh Joshi, the Speaker, CP Joshi, issued a notice to all the MLAs. The matter went to court, and the matter is still in the court. The Rajasthan High Court is still hearing the matter. But if a floor test happens or if an assembly session is convened, even without explicitly stating that the agenda is for a floor test, the Congress can still issue a whip on the basis of some debate or any particular bill. And if these MLAs don't turn up for the assembly session or they do come and vote against or abstain from voting, all these will attract disqualification proceedings because it will be a violation of the party whip. So this is where Mr. Gehlot and his camp and the Congress wants to checkmate these rebels. So that is why they're insisting on an assembly session without explicitly stating that they want to go for a floor test.
Late last night, after this episode was recorded, Governor Kalraj Mishra finally gave his nod for the assembly session to be held from August 14. This decision came hours after Gehlot's cabinet sent another revised proposal. This session will be held as per the state legislative assembly rules. In the revised proposal, the Gehlot cabinet had demanded an assembly session from August 14. What made this proposal different from the previous ones was the fact that it abided by the governor's suggestion to call a regular session at a 21-day notice, which in this case starts from July 23. The fresh proposal cited some ministerial work as the agenda to call the session. But this entire matter has once again called to question the governor's role. Like, can he actually deny a request for the assembly session to take place? What is his role supposed to be in such a crisis? In the past, governors' decisions in such cases have come under question, like when they have installed members of the party that they are affiliated with as chief ministers, or when they have dismissed a government without giving it a chance to prove its majority in the assembly. This is what happened in 1989 when P. Venkata Subbiah dismissed the S.R. Bommai government. So what is it about this role that enables such decisions? To answer these questions, we speak to Apurva Vishwanath, who reports on law for the Indian Express.
So the first aspect is, how the role of the governor was envisaged when the constitution was framed. So the British had a regent, the representative of the crown in every princely state, and that post really continued as what we now know as the governor. The Raj Bhavans, the tradition is largely inherited from that role that already existed during the colonial times. So even in the Constituent Assembly, the role of the governor was something that was fiercely debated. And if you look at Article 163 of the Constitution, which Ambedkar defended why the governor's role is limited and how it will not affect a democratically elected state governments. So Article 163 explicitly says that the role of the governor is very limited and he's supposed to act independently, but on the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So, in very few cases where the Constitution explicitly gives him some discretionary power, only then is the governor supposed to exercise his own independence, like his own discretion. Otherwise, the governor is sort of bound to follow the aid and advice of the Council of Ministers. So, in that sense, also because the post of the governor is nominated, it is largely a titular role, a constitutional role, but nonetheless a titular role like the President of India.
And in this kind of scenario where we're talking about, the case of Rajasthan, what obligation does he have to hold the assembly? Like, because right now, 3 requests have gone on to him by the Gehlot government, and he's refused all 3 of them.
So the power to summon or dissolve the house is with the governor. But again, even that comes with the caveat that this will be done only on the aid and advice of the cabinet. So when the chief minister requests to convene a session of the assembly, the governor generally has pretty much no reason to say no to such a request, unless in a political circumstance when he feels that the chief minister has lost the confidence of the house, that the governor can himself independently call for a session of the assembly and hold a trust vote. So here in the case of Rajasthan, in fact, because there is a doubt cast on Ashok Gehlot's strength in the house, the governor should in fact convene a session of the assembly, ask Gehlot to go through a trust vote. But instead, what we are seeing is the governor refusing to summon the assembly, and multiple requests being made by the ruling party. If you remember, in other situations where a similar power tussle happened, where there were defections, disqualifications, it would be the opposition pushing for a session of the House and the ruling party, the chief minister, trying to buy time by not requesting the governor to convene a House. Like we saw that happen even in Madhya Pradesh. And then the governor himself went ahead and made his decision independently.
So, like you're saying that the role of the governor requires a certain independence. But considering governors usually have deep political affiliations, does that fact remains in conflict with what the role is supposed to be?
So take the role of a governor or another constitutional post that is now again being discussed in the Rajasthan context, the role of the speaker. Both these constitutional roles have to have a certain nature of non-partisanship, independence to fulfill their constitutional roles. But what happens is you have either political have-beens appointed as governors and you have the ruling party pick the speaker. So when they come from these deep political affiliations, in a sense, they're never able to exercise their independence and be non-partisan in these roles. So you see a constant tussle between opposition-ruled state governments and a governor appointed by the center.
Before we get to the next segment, I just wanted your quick attention. One of the big reasons people say they like this show is because it helps them understand the news better. It provides them with the context they need to see the bigger picture. And there is perhaps no other place that does that better than Indian Express's Explained section. We on 3 Things refer to the section regularly, and it helps us make this show. If you're a regular reader of Indian Express, you know how useful the Explained section can be, especially when you're looking for in-depth analysis by the right experts. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explained and access the coverage 24/7. Explained by Indian Express, where news that matters is explained by experts who know the subject. Now, back to the show. Next, we talk about the dairy industry. The dairy farmers across the country are facing problems as milk prices continue to drop. Earlier this month, dairy farmers in Maharashtra started a series of protests against the low prices dairies have been paying them. As part of the protests, several of them took to dumping their milk on the road and stopping milk supplies to urban areas. In this segment, we talk to Harish Damodaran, Indian Express's rural affairs editor, about what the government can do to support these farmers and the reason milk prices have gone down.
See, the first point which we need to note is this fall has been very unusual. Normally during summers and monsoon, this is normally what we call as the lean season. This is a time when normally production by cows and buffaloes is normally low during this time. From the summer, maybe from say April till almost September. So this is a time when normally your production is low, whereas your consumption goes up.
Because it's the summer, people consume more curd, lassi, and ice cream during this period. So with the production low and consumption high, prices remain firm.
But this time what we have seen is, if you look at the, say, procurement prices, buffalo milk prices have fallen from about, say, 45 rupees early March. It has fallen to something like, say, 32, 33 rupees, which is a price which, say, private dairies are paying. Maybe somebody like, say, Amul is paying, say, 39 rupees. Okay, but even Amul has reduced its price from, say, about 45 rupees to 39 rupees. And cow milk prices, similarly, they were something around, say, 31, 32 rupees in early March. Today, they are hardly 20, 21 rupees. So overall, what we have seen is a very unusual phenomenon of prices falling during this summer monsoon period.
Harish says that this is because demand has collapsed. Because of the lockdown, hotels, restaurants, tea shops, and more importantly, sweet shops, which use a lot of milk products, all have remained closed.
So basically, your institutional demand, which may be, say, 25%, 25, 30%, that has collapsed. So we are seeing for the first time milk prices fall during this time, whereas they normally fall after about, say, September, October, when production goes up in the natural course. And I think this whole thing has got upset because of the lockdown, because of the sudden demand destruction. And that's why you're seeing all these things which you're seeing in Maharashtra and all these things. And it is possible that it may actually pick up more because the real surplus milk will start from, say, middle of August.
The thing to note is that buffaloes typically end up giving birth to calves around August and September. This is the time they tend to produce more milk, around 50% more. This is also known as the flush period. This period also coincides with some major Indian festivals when milk consumption goes up.
Say, for example, from August, you're going to see the festival season starting with, say, Raksha Bandhan on August 3rd. Then after that, you'll have Janmashtami. And then the whole thing will culminate with Diwali and Chhat Puja kind of a thing. And in between, you'll have Dashera, then the Navratri season. So consumption typically may go up during that period, say August till, say, November.
But now with the COVID-19 pandemic, if demand continues to remain low when milk production is high, that's when the problem we are seeing right now will get worse.
And we are now entering the flush season. And when production starts increasing, and you cannot plug an animal's udders, right? I mean, once it calves, it'll just start producing. So the only way out for the farmer is probably not to feed the animal, maybe starve it so that it doesn't increase. But then that will create problems next year. Like today's calf is tomorrow's milch cow. And if the calf is not eating well, if it does not have adequate nutrition, it will turn out to be a very poor milker. Its milk yields will definitely get affected.
Harish points out that India has never had a demand problem when it comes to milk, because milk is considered a superior food. When incomes rise, typically so does milk consumption.
Like even a poor household, which would probably be using, say, dalda, vanaspati, on their rotis, the moment their income starts rising, they may switch over from vanaspati to desi ghee. And same thing, they will give their children one glass of milk. So Indians generally tend to consume a lot of milk, and milk has a very high elasticity of demand, especially at low levels.
But with incomes going down as well, people's milk consumption will be hit. It is keeping this in mind that Harish says that the government needs to step in and help dairy farmers. One thing that can be done is what is typically done during the flush season, and that is converting excess milk into solids, like skim milk powder, ghee, or white butter.
So what I believe the government should do is the government should create a buffer stock right away of both skim milk powder and white butter. And the government should pay dairies for that. And according to me, it will cost nothing much. Suppose you were to create a buffer stock of, say, 50,000 tons of skim milk powder, and you were to pay dairies, say, 200 rupees. That will come to about 1,000 crore rupees. And same is the case if you were to create, say, about 30,000 tons of white butter and ghee. The cost may be about 2,000 crore. So if you spend 2,000 crore rupees now, at a later stage, next summer, say, for example, next summer, by then we can assume that demand will come back to normal. We can assume that at least by next May, June, etc., your dhabas will start running, the Pizza Huts and Domino's, and everybody will start operating again. So then this entire stock can be used at that period. So it's just a question of for 1 year, and it is possible that the government may actually even make a profit on this. And I believe that somebody like the National Dairy Development Board should do this right away, because we cannot afford milk prices crashing like this and farmers starving their animals. And it's very much possible that all these cows and buffaloes will ultimately end up in the slaughterhouse. I don't think that is desirable at all. because I definitely foresee that by December, etc., and these things, what we are seeing in Maharashtra and maybe parts of Karnataka, etc., it's not going to be limited there. It's going to spread across UP, across Rajasthan, and it'll be impossible, to contain it. So I think the government should move very fast and create a buffer stock.
The other thing that has been worrying dairy farmers is India's trade with the US. The US has been interested in exporting dairy products to India, and right now it is unclear where exactly India stands on the issue. Harish says that even though he doesn't think many dairy products are going to be imported from the US, the government should still come out and make it clear that that would not happen.
In many cases, it's not imports. It's only the threat of imports, the prospect of imports. And then basically it affects sentiment. And if tomorrow dairies feel that, skim milk powder and white butter imports are going to come in, then they'll say, hey, why should I procure milk now? There's no point. I'm going to run at a loss. So then that worsens the whole thing.
An important thing to consider is that milk is what gives dairy farmers their daily incomes. Unlike other crops, milk is produced daily and sold daily.
See, if I'm a sugarcane farmer, I may sell my crop, only once or twice a year. Whereas milk is something which I sell on a daily basis, and it generates daily cash. And that is what actually takes care of the farmer's daily expenses. And we cannot afford this kind of situation where milk prices collapse in this kind of way. And especially now that we are now going to enter the flush season, when production by animals increases in the natural course.
And in the end, we talk about non-personal data. A government committee headed by Infosys co-founder Chris Gopalakrishnan has suggested that non-personal data generated in the country should be allowed to be shared by various domestic companies and entities, including the government. A 9-member committee has released a draft report regarding the matter and has kept time till August 13 for the public to send suggestions. It has also suggested setting up a new authority which would be in charge of monitoring the use and mining of such non-personal data. But what exactly is non-personal data? To understand this, we talked to Aashish Aryan, who reports on IT and the telecom industry for the paper.
If we consider the very basic definition of what non-personal data is, it is any data set which does not contain any information from which you can identify a person or a company, and any personal identifiers should not be present in that data. That is non-personal data, which means that you cannot identify any individual, whether it is a living person or a dead person, by having a look at the data, a first glance at the data. That constitutes non-personal data.
Aashish gives the example of a food delivery service. Typically, they would have details which would include your name, age, gender, your food preferences, your address, and your phone number. All things by which you can be identified by. Now, let's say if we just consider gender, age, your food preference, and the locality you stay in, and not your exact home address. Things that are yours, but one can't necessarily identify you by.
Through that, you can come to a conclusion that people in such and such area, maybe order, say, biryani more, or in this area they eat veg more, or in this area they eat non-veg more. And that, the basic unit of that is non-personal data, which does not identify a person, but it still gives you a trend of a particular area or a particular service. So one is food delivery platforms, of course. Then among others, it can be collected by, say, your ride-hailing apps like the Uber and the Olas of the world. Telecom companies which have your data of where you are making calls, for how long you are making calls, which are the people that you make calls to the most, or which areas are the calls that you make to the most. So these can be collected. Say electricity distribution companies, they can always anonymize your data and say that in this area over the past 5 years, say 10,000 people have taken new electricity connections. So all this, these also form a part of non-personal data.
This non-personal data at the hands of a company can be used to target a particular set of people to get them to buy more of their products or be more engaged in the company's ecosystem. But the concerns run even beyond that.
Say if a political party gets hold of non-personal data of a particular area, where it sees that, there are X number of people of this religion in a particular area and X number of people of this religion in a particular area, it can target accordingly, and it can mold its campaign accordingly, that they will go in a particular area and they can probably give such speeches which will shape people to vote in a particular way. So even though it is anonymized, even the 9-member government committee has said that even if it is anonymized and it is hard anonymized, it can be misused by such companies, such political parties, and even the government. Say, if the government comes to know that people of a particular region or of a particular religion did not vote for it, there can be consequences which may not be very desirable.
Non-personal data is a very new area when it comes to forming privacy policy, and there aren't many global standards for it, like there are for personal data that includes people's biometrics.
In the non-personal data, only India has a draft suggestion as of now. And then apart from India, the European Union has a regulation framework. And it does not have a very strict standards on what constitutes non-personal data and how it can be shared, but it has a regulation framework which suggests on how data should flow freely only within the European Union, which says that the members of the union should cooperate with each other when it comes to sharing of data, and that all the member states of European Union, they can share information without any hindrances. But if they make any changes to data localization norms or any data norms which is present in their country, they must inform the commission that we plan to change this, and accordingly the EU will whether negotiate with it or ask it to withhold or suggest changes in it.
Now, although India's draft, formed by the 9-member committee, is a pioneer in identifying the power and the role of data in an anonymized form, Aashish says that there are things that experts say that it has overlooked.
Say, if we look at certain aspects of community non-personal data, experts say that this could have been clearer. And if you are saying that a community has the right to protect its own data, but you still give the trends in which the community votes or maybe eats or maybe takes vacations, then it can give a lot more information to parties which are looking to exploit those data. Say, if we are saying that startups and companies should be able to freely exchange data between themselves, then we must demarcate that what is the total amount of data that one company can share with others. And because each company collects very, very, very personal data from you and me. Now, if we are saying that, okay, the personal data is not being shared, but non-personal data is being shared, what is the extent that they are sharing among themselves? And because these companies are the sole owners and the sole guardians of such data, there must be someone, a custodian above them, who checks how much they are sharing among each other and whether they have colluded amongst themselves to maybe form a sort of a cartel and give out more data to each other than we as data owners are willing.
You were listening to Three Things by the Indian Express. Today's show, as always, was edited and mixed by our producer, Joshua Thomas. Before we go, here's another reminder to check out Indian Express's Explained page. You can log on to indianexpress.com/explain and find in-depth analysis by the right experts. It has everything you need to know to understand the news better and see the bigger picture. If you like this show, then you can subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.